I am so thrilled that an honor to have you on my podcast, Joel. I have been following you for years, and I recently got to watch the documentary, The Lunatic Farmer, which I was expecting to see some crazy stuff in there because, of the title, but I I I wish there were more people like you in the world, especially farmers.
Well, thank you. It's a delight and an honor to be with you. Yeah, that movie really caught us. Caught an essence of us that we have not seen before, and so it was a real privilege to be in the movie, and a lot of people have seen it. So we hope it continues to get some good traction and make some inroads in our culture. It certainly is an interesting time to launch it right here with the Maha movement and all that's going on that scale.
I think one of the things that really spoke to me, because as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I've been following biodynamic farming for years. My daughter went to a Waldorf school where they teach biodynamic farming, and almost all the schools do some sort of that on the premises. Um, but I think one of the things I loved the most was the way you weave in throughout that film the connection with the earth and God and just really embracing what, Mother Earth has given us. And um, I feel like we need more of that.
Yeah, well, you know, the earth is not something to just be exploited to our whims. And one of the problems, of course, in the world today is that we are, you know, way down the road. We're the U.S. is not the first civilization to mess up its nest. Uh, Civilizations have been messing up their nest for a very, very long time. If the Greeks, the Romans, the Polynesians, Easter Island. I mean, you can go back to as many as you want to. And the one of the tragedies of humans is that we tend to live in a with a short-term view, not a long-term view, and we tend to view a place as as my place. And I mean, I'm a big believer in anchoring to a place, but um, it's my place to be honored and respected and stewarded, not my place to be raped and exploited and conquistadored. And so those are very different senses of place. And I think definitely American agriculture, because it takes a very mechanistic view toward life as opposed to a biological view toward life. It views nature as a reluctant partner that we have to kind of wrestle, into submission, as opposed to a benevolent lover that just wants to be caressed in the right places. That's the difference, and so that plays out then on when you farm a certain way, is the result of that farming more water or less water, more air, less air, more soil, less soil, more pollinators, fewer pollinators, more wildlife, less wildlife. Those are all kind of, barometric measures, if you will, of the outcome of that overriding philosophy of how you view this place.
Yeah, and the cinematography was really beautiful and it really captured your farm, Polyface Farms. It just really captured how incredibly lush it is and the animals looked happy and joyful. And I think
Yeah.
that goes a long way because I'm a chiropractor, and the focus of my practice for the past 20 years has been how stress affects the body, right? How stress can cause pretty much every illness that we encounter. And I'm not saying it's the only issue, but when we have stress, our body isn't going to function as well. And you seem to really appreciate that with your animals and understand that if they're stressed out, what are they then putting into their body? How's it affecting their body, which then will affect, the person eating that meat or those eggs.
Right. Well, yeah, man, you've captured the a lot of the essence of what we do here in our own philosophy, and I have become a bit of a almost a woo-woo weirdo to suggest, can we eat happiness? Can we eat happiness? Can we eat stress? And this is not just animals, this is plants too. It's everything. And I would suggest that we can. And there are lots of things about biology we don't know yet. I mean, literally, and look at the last 10-year, research into the microbiome, for example. It's been a dramatic change, and so one of the things that we've learned from the chefs over the years that we supply numerous restaurants, and one of the things we learned from our chefs is that all of our meat, poultry, pork stuff cooks about 15% faster than anything in the store. And we can't figure out why, because generally the the conventional meats don't even get any exercise. I mean, they're in confinement houses and they don't even get any exercise. Our animals exercise. You'd think they'd be tawnier and tougher, and more whatever wildish kind of thing, which would make them, more difficult to cook. But the fact is that they're not. They cook way faster, and so the only thing we've been able to kind of deduce from this is when you're under stress, your body is secreting adrenaline. uh, that's what it secretes, this adrenaline. I mean, that's how a hundred pound mom can pick up a car off her 3-year-old toddler. And when that happens, your muscles tighten up. And you're a chiropractor. You know way more about this than I do. But there's a tightness to it. And and when you see, like, drug addicts and this kind of thing, you see we call it hard living, hard living, as opposed to the softness of flesh and skin and all that. Very, very different. And so yes, we believe very much that the reason that our animals, that all of our meats cook so much faster, is because our animals are never stressed. They're happy, and so they're not secreting this adrenaline all their life that's tightening up the tissue. And so they come in, much more relaxed throughout life, and then that relax shows itself in your pan. Then, of course, then the big kind of mystical esoteric question is, well, what does that do in you? If we're eating stress, if we're eating violence, does that do something in us? Does that how does that manifest in us? And I'm not sure we have the empirical, our hard science and empirical science. Those kind of things are really, really hard to measure. But I'm confident that if you here's the thing, our microbiome, which we now have studied, and it's an they the trillions of microbes inside of us, they actually talk to each other. We know that there's a language, and they talk to each other. So I think it's important to realize that to think about our mouth. So my mouth is a gateway to everything my microbiome thinks and believes and knows about the world. So they're inside of me. The world is out here, and so my microbiome, as it communes every day, through my mouth, by stuff that's coming in, you know, microbial cousins, if you will. Oh, hi, cousins. These microbial cousins. Well, how is it out there? And if you're ingesting things that are disrespectful to life, adulterants of life, red dye 29, whatever, violent to life. If that's what you're ingesting, then your microbiome is going to sense, oh, the world is a very, violent, abusive, dishonoring place, as opposed to if you're ingesting things that are grown in high humus, sweet soils with compost and tender loving care and by farmers who ask how to make happy pigs, not just fatter pigs or faster growing pigs. Then your microbiome is going to have that sense of peace and harmony that comes through your gateway. And I just think that's a beautiful it's a beautiful picture of personal responsibility and uh, personal responsibility, but also just a beautiful picture of how we can then um, we can then assure our internal microbiome, we can assure it that, it's okay, all is well here. You uh, go after your function. It's okay to have your parties.
Well, it's funny as you were talking, I was thinking also about the people who are caring for the animals and being, at a place like Polyface Farms and other regenerative farms, how happy they are. And because we know that we pick up on each other's emotions. So my sense is that the people that are caring for your animals are happier and grounded and joyful, and the
Yes,
animals also pick up on that. So it becomes that symbiotic relationship.
yes, very, very much so. And there's a sense. I mean, you talk to the average conventional farmer, and these are good people. They're not evil intended people, but they get caught up in this treadmill of I've got to feed Sri Lanka, I've got to feed Bangladesh. And the conventional farm community preaches, volumes of food, cheap food, and the culture itself actually pushes farmers to the edge of society, like we're a bunch of marginalized peasants. And if you don't believe that, have an honors student go to their, high high school counselor and tell their high school counselor, they want to be a farmer. That happened to me. I've still got, emotional scars from my last visit to the high school guidance counselor and told her I want to be a farmer. Thought I was going to have to do CPR on the floor. What? Waste all that talent, waste all those brains, waste all that. And I'm suggesting that maybe we'd have better resource stewardship in our culture if we actually put farmers as this is another kind of metaphor I'm working on, as the first responders of our nation's ultimate wealth. Listen, Wall Street can go on, but if we don't have soil, if we don't have air, and we don't have water, it doesn't matter what happens at Wall Street. A culture's ultimate wealth is wrapped up in its resource base, and farmers are our first responders. Maybe we need to put them on a pedestal as the first responders of our resource base, and then we would have better farmers, more intentional farmers, more thinking farmers, rather than farmers who just got caught up as dependents in the ag industrial complex to just pour on the chemicals and pour on the and view soil. I mean, they actually say this: the soil is just a medium to hold up roots. Basically, my chemical inputs are like an IV, like a plant IV. To grow the plant. The soil is just to hold the roots. And man, that's gonna get you an IV an IV people mentality. Sir Albert Howard, when he wrote an agricultural testament in whatever 1942, 43, and brought for the first time a scientific aerobic composting formula to the world. He said in there that he called chemical fertilizers artificial manures. That's what he called them, artificial manures. And he said when you grow plants on artificials, you get artificial plants that then create artificial animals, which make artificial people who can only be kept alive with artificials.
Yeah, it reminds me of when, the food industry was pushing margarine, right?
Oh,
It feels like every time that they think that they can make something better, scientists or whomever, it, like to me, you're never going to make something as good as what's produced in nature. And another great example would be like hip replacement surgery or knee replacement. Bone is much stronger than these other materials. So how do we make ourselves healthier? So the other thing that came to mind as you were speaking was when Bobby Kennedy Jr. was running for president, he would talk about healing, drug addicts and this idea of working on a regenerative farm and getting their hands in the soil. And I feel like, it would be great for anybody who's suffering with chronic illness. Or I also think about the elderly, the elderly being pushed into these nursing homes, and like how wonderful would it be to have little communities by the farms where they could go in and maybe talk to the cows, or, help plant, in a garden, like have gardens where they can, get their hands in the soil, and rather than, just being stuck in some, concrete building. So the question I have for you, I got a lot of questions, but another one that comes to mind is how can we encourage more farmers to go regenerative? And if you wouldn't mind just giving a, I know like I watched the film and I've read your books, and I know that explaining regenerative farming isn't a 2-minute conversation, but maybe you can just briefly explain the difference between a regenerative farm and a conventional.
yeah, I think a couple of critical things that come to mind. One is when we talk about and regenerative is right now the buzzword. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when it first started being called natural, then it was sustainable, then it was organic, now it's regenerative. I mean, who knows what the next buzzword's going to be. So, what we're talking about is an ecological view of farming as opposed to, or I would say, a biological view of farming as opposed to a mechanical view of farming. And this really got its start with Justus von Liebig, the Austrian, biochemist, who in 1837 used his vacuum tubes to say that all life is simply a rearrangement of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. And his heart was well intended. He was trying to figure out a way to help soil fertility. He was afraid, this was the time of Malthus, and the planet was getting ready to, starve itself to death because, we were outgrowing our food supply. And so he was not evil intended, but what he did was create a paradigm for the first time in human history that life is fundamentally mechanical, and a bunch of parts that pieces that we can put back and forth together, like car parts. But and I know that life is way more than that, because things that are living are dynamic. They make decisions. They trade. They have relationships, and they make decisions. So you can love your car, and you can go out and hug the hood of your car all day, and it doesn't care a lick. It doesn't respond. It doesn't. But you can go out and hug a milk cow, and she'll love you back. You can, and we know even plants respond to that kind of emotional thing. So I think the biggest the philosophical difference here is that when you talk about a regenerative ag program, it is fundamentally bound up in that life is biological as opposed to mechanical. you know, is there chemistry in? Yes, there's chemistry in biology, but that's not all of it. It's way more than that. And so we study the microbes. We study, and we're all about building soil as opposed to exploiting soil. We're all about hydrating the landscape rather than desertifying the landscape and using up the water, the hydration commons that are there. And we actually ask how to grow an animal or a plant into its full physiological distinctiveness and expression, the full expression of that plant, as opposed to just one characteristic like fatter, faster, bigger, cheaper. Can we grow them? Can we grow it in its full manifestation, which then also includes its full nutritional qualities? And so that's been studied now over and over empirically. We now have enough good science to show that there are remarkable nutrition differences between um, things grown biologically as opposed to things grown mechanically. I mean, we submitted our eggs several years ago. There was a study done, and we were one of 12 pastured egg farmers in the country that participated in the study. And just pick out one: folic acid, really important for pregnant women. Um, Conventional eggs in the store, the official USDA nutrition label is 48 micrograms of folic acid per egg. Ours averaged 1,038 micrograms per egg. So,
Wow.
these are not little 10% deviations. These are massive, massive deviations. Grass finished beef, on some 90 nutrient profiles, is virtually double what a grain finished feedlot fattened beef is. These nutritional differences are profound. They're measurable, and but getting them often requires a little more management and a little more time. Slower growing, so there's a little more time, a little more management, a little more labor, and um, and so as a result, the price tag is often a little bit higher. But if you don't have to use any pharmaceuticals, and if you don't have to go visit the doctor, what's that worth?
Yeah, and years ago, I saw this film about the feed that cows were being given that had, I guess they were GMOs, and there was glyphosate, and they talked about I mean, I don't want to get disgusting here for anybody with a weak stomach, but their bowels exploding from the feed, and then once they switched the feed, that the cows got healthier, and so for me, like I always, since watching that film, I made it 100% committed to only buying organic. And for years, I
Mhm.
thought that that was enough. And then many years ago, I got friendly with an Amish farmer. I used to live in Pennsylvania, not far from
Mhm.
Lancaster, and I would go there and buy my meats from this farmer. And, I didn't realize that even organic doesn't necessarily mean pharmaceutical free. That and the Amish farmers were really being targeted because they weren't following the guidelines of bleaching their meats and injecting them with the vaccines. And like, how can something be organic if it has any kind of chemicals or has been, receiving vaccines? So I would say that would be another clear
Right.
distinction between regenerative and even organic.
Yeah, well, I can assure you that within the movement, there is quite a bit of, and I'm talking about the good side of the movement. There is a lot of difference of opinion regarding vaccines. And of course, organic, you can vaccine all you want to in organics. Now, we don't at our farm. We've chosen the non-vaccine approach. But yeah, that's why it's good to know your farmer, know your food, know your source, And the biggest lie is that we can change the system without us having to make any changes. I'm sure you see it all the time. People want to come in, fix me, doc, but I don't want to make any change. I want to eat. I want to eat what I've been eating. I want to live like I've been living. Da da da. And we see that all the time. People want a different outcome, but don't want to participate in the changes it takes to create a different outcome. And and so uh, all of us are prone to finger point, well, if those people would just do the right thing, if that guy would just do the right thing, we love to do that. But the truth is that there's a lot that we can do, personally. And some of that is, get off of Netflix and invest your time in sleuthing your provenance. I mean, goodness, we're more concerned about the purity of the gas in our car than we are the food, our body's fuel, and so you have to find these things, sleuth these things in every and beautifully now, Nancy. The beautiful thing now is compared to, let's say, 40 years ago, the number of options now in the marketplace are way more than they were 40 years ago. You can and shipping. I mean, we ship nationwide. The logistics of shipping now is just is so much cheaper. It's so much more efficient. And so there is really no reason for a person to not find, find better quality food. People always ask me, well, why aren't you in the supermarket? Why aren't you in Walmart? Well, in my world, there wouldn't be a Walmart.
Right.
Let's not even patronize that system, because I mean, we could do a whole program on how that whole system militates against whatever, against truthfulness and honesty in food. I'll just leave it at that. And so I don't even want to be, at Walmart. And I think that as we move into an unorthodox approach, you got to realize, okay, this means you've got to go unorthodox in a lot of things. I mean, if you go to a chiropractor, which means you've taken a little bit of a bend out of orthodox conventional pharmaceutical solutions and the AMA approach. And let me say right here, I'm not opposed to doctors. All right, if I cut my arm off, I'm going to the emergency room. Okay,
Exactly.
there's a place for trauma and allelopathic medicine. Okay, but it's not in these, as you've described, these chronic, non-infectious lifestyle kind of things. And so if you want a different outcome, you've got to invest in a different, a different approach. Dave Ramsey, the financial guru, says you tend to be successful at what you put attention on. So if you're putting attention on, on TikTok, you'll probably be successful at TikTok. If you're putting attention on the finding the good food, you'll probably find the good food too. But you can't be a TikTok addict and an alternative thinking addict at the same time. Those are two kind of mutually exclusive things.
Do you have resources on your website where people can learn, like if they want to have their own regenerative farm or have something like that, even if they only have a couple acres, do you have any kind of resources to teach people how to do that?
Oh, yes. So our website, so I don't have a personal social media presence. Everything is through the farm, Polyface Farms, Polyface. So I've written 16 books, and one of the latest ones is Polyface Micro. And it's all about taking what we've done at scale and scaling it down to tiny, homestead micro scale. In fact, there's one chapter in there on how to have rabbits and chickens in a Manhattan apartment.
Wow.
Okay, so yeah, so without stinking up the place. So uh, yeah, there's resources there, and of course, we do events and gatherings at our farm. Lots of lots of tours and seminars and things like that. It's all on the website. It's a very comprehensive website. You can go there and park yourself for 5 minutes and look around. Polyfacefarms.com.
That's wonderful. And what I was even thinking about is, how certain communities have these community gardens, right? Where there's a piece of
Yep.
land that's dedicated and the community shares the garden. And wouldn't that be nice if there was a way for communities to develop something like that for chickens and cows, and so that for people that wanted to not just eat that way, but be involved in the process and, throw their phone away for a couple hours and connect with the soil and get grounded, I think the world would be a happier place.
Oh, no, no question. There are few things that are as therapeutic. I mean, what you're talking about here is an alternative therapy. There are few things as therapeutic as participating in our ecological umbilical. And I mean, Finland now leads the world in identifying the health benefits of actually, especially of infants, toddlers, and children for their immune function of uh, being on dirt, being out with animals, and even the iconic book Guns, Germs, and Steel. It identified that culture civilizations that had proximity to animals were the ones that ended up, being the most powerful civilizations. And I'm not trying to say, we need to be taking over the world. I'm just saying that our immune system is like a muscle. I think, the hygiene hypothesis, many doctors have signed on to the hygiene hypothesis, and the basic hypothesis is that our immune system is like a muscle, and it needs exercise along. And one of the best ways to exercise it is to get some splinters and eat some dirt and get some calluses and actually interact in a participatory way with with humus, with nature, with animals. In Europe, interestingly, I've been to Europe many times, and especially in the Netherlands, they have a very aggressive, non-institutional approach for emotionally disadvantaged, intellectually disadvantaged, all sorts of people. Where rather than putting them in as you said, in a concrete place, they actually place them on farms, and they can put away eggs. They can clean out stalls around cows, things like this. This is actually not demeaning work. It is affirming work. There, look, the most primal requirement of the human spirit, isn't it, is to be needed, to feel like somebody needs me. It doesn't matter that um, it doesn't matter how big that need is. In fact, many of the quote unquote lower marginal needs that we think of as a sophisticated developed culture are the most important. I mean, the plumber, the electrician, the the janitor. All right, I mean, these are we've tended to push these to the side. But listen, when it really comes to living, uh, it's far more important to have somebody that knows how to fix the toilet and and fix the car than it is somebody who knows how to do international mergers and finance. And I'm not trying to demean that either. I'm just saying that in Europe they really have an aggressive deinstitutionalized approach. And I've been on farms there, and it's wonderful to see an 8-person crew, for example, and two of them are extremely either physically, mentally, or emotionally disadvantaged, but they're there, and they're being needed and affirmed. They can't do what everybody else does, but they can do something, and it gives them purpose and affirmation and importance, and everybody else is appreciative that they're there too, because they can do things. They're happy to do things that maybe that would be a little bit boring for me. Wouldn't be a challenge for me, but for them it is a challenge. It's enjoyable, and they get affirmed. So yeah, I think there's a lot of this deinstitutionalized structure that we could do, including, as you mentioned, elder care. My dad always, as he got older, before he passed away, he had a dream of having, like a 12-person elder care facility here on the farm with elevated gardens that could be accessed by a wheelchair, so you could kind of work gardens, and they could go out and grow a lot of their own food and that sort of thing, right up until the day. But, we lock these elder care people up in these concrete bunkers and feed them Cheerios and Fruit Loops. And it's almost obscene.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that because my mother had dementia and and this is a whole nother conversation. She was on statins for 25 years, which she didn't tell me about until about 3 years before I convinced her doctor to stop prescribing them because she was of the mindset, even though I'm a doctor, but he's a real doctor. So
Right, right,
she
right. Oh
says
yeah.
she's going to listen to him. I finally convinced him. She passed a year ago at the age of 91, and I finally convinced him, 3 years beforehand that she doesn't have any heart disease. She has no family history of heart disease. There's no reason, and she exercises every day. So,
Mhm.
we were able to stop the progression of the dementia. But when she would stay with me, so she actually lived independently until she died. She lived in an over 55 community. My cousin lived in the same complex and would have her over for dinner, 4 or 5 nights a week. But she would, in the morning, eat cereal for breakfast, eat a sandwich for lunch. And if you would go into her cupboard, it was filled with potato chips, pretzels, cookies. And every time I would go, I would empty it out without her knowing. I'd throw it all away. Someone would say, well, why don't you just like give it to other people? I'm like, no one should be eating that garbage. And
Yeah.
when she would stay with me for the weekend, I would feed her just eggs for breakfast. She'd had 2 eggs for breakfast every day. There was no
Right.
sugar. There was, like fruit was okay, but limited
Yeah.
amount. But it was, this keto kind of diet, and it was all organic. And the difference in her cognition from Friday to Monday when I would take her back was huge. That she had definitely had improved memory. And, it kind of breaks my heart because we were looking at a nursing home right before she had a stroke, and then she passed 2 weeks later. And, they wanted to do a feeding tube, which she never would have agreed to. But went to a few of these nursing homes,
Hmm.
and, when I see what they feed them, it's easy, it's cheap, but it's not helping their quality of life. And it's definitely not being supportive of the brain. So
Right.
to me, like eggs is the perfect protein,
Yeah.
especially if you buy, from free range hens and, you're not buying the conventional. And we even see it. So we moved into our house a few months ago, and the house came with 6 chickens. And I
Mm.
had never had chickens before. The idea was always this kind of dreamy thing because, we always play with this idea of homesteading. But the truth is I don't actually like eggs. I just can't stand the taste of them and it kills me. But I get such joy from the chickens. They all have their own unique personalities, and
Oh
when
yeah.
they see it's coming to let them out of their pen for the day, they just come running to the gate, and they let us pet them, and it's so joyful. And it wasn't something I was expecting. I have a dog that brings me joy, but I wasn't expecting a bunch of chickens to bring me joy. I know I like really deviated there with that line of thinking, but I just wanted to reinforce how
Yeah.
having chickens or maybe sharing them with a neighbor, because maybe you want to travel a lot. I think it's worth it for your mental and physical health.
Yeah. The whole animal therapy thing is just huge. We 2 years ago we began taking a chicken with us when we make our urban drop. We service about 35 urban, we call them urban drop points. So this is on a monthly schedule, and people order online, and we take their orders to them directly to them from the farm. And so a couple of years ago, we put together a nice little wooden pretty wooden coop, and we started taking one chicken with us each time. It wasn't the same one, but we called her Polly Hen. I mean, we're Polyface Farms, so Polly Hen. This is Polly Hen. And do you know, we have people, we had a lady that every time we go every month, she takes her, I don't know whether it's a son or daughter, she takes her child out of school early to come and pet the chicken. There's a guy that's about 3 blocks away from one drop, and he's in a wheelchair. He's wheelchair bound, and his caregiver and he come just to pet the chicken. 3 blocks, just to pet the chicken. That's how starved people are for a real connection. And if I may say that as we've become more techno sophisticated and as artificial intelligence starts to you know get even more and more pronounced in our lives, we are becoming less and less anchored and moored to you've used the word grounding a couple of times, and grounding has numerous ramifications. You can have what electrical grounding, where you actually put your bare feet on the ground. I mean, that's a real thing. But there's also a grounding, a spiritual and emotional grounding to the foundation things of life. And the problem is, I think, that today we, as a culture, as we embrace this techno sophistication, and this electronic screen culture, um, we are living more and more time hours a day in a virtual world. The average American male now, according to what I've read, the average American male now, 25 to 35 years old. So this is arguably the most virulent time of a male's life. Okay, 25 to 35 years old, spends 20 hours a week on video games, playing video games. The average American male, not females, but males, because they're violent, and they awaken this male conquering emotion. And so this idea that the farther we get away from I love your word grounding. I mean, I haven't used it in that context, but yeah, I love it. From that kind of grounding, it does things to us. It keeps us from actually thinking we live in reality. So then we can go off into fantasy. And then the worst thing is the hubris of it. The hubris of it, that, oh man, I've got the world at my fingertips. All I've got to do is wiggle this button and wiggle that button, and I can make the world do anything I want to. And that's one reason I so love children and gardens, children gardening, because if that tomato plant dies, the game of life doesn't give you a new tomato plant because you didn't water it or take care of it, or it got sick and died. But you play a video game, you wrap your car around a utility pole, and in 2 seconds it gives you a new car, and you're back off to the races. Well, when you're 16 and you really wrap your car around a utility pole, life doesn't give you a new car in 2 minutes, and you run off in life. And so I think that this element of actually visiting farms, touching animals, uh, goodness, sprouting some mung beans on the windowsill, having a little vermicomposting kit under your kitchen sink where you have a worm bed, a beehive on the roof, an herb garden, in a PVC, potted thing on your porch, touching and interacting with the mystery and the majesty of life is really important to keep us grounded and from becoming too smart for our britches. Um, I think that's a wonderful point, and everybody can do that in some capacity.
And I hope that this conversation maybe inspires some parents to talk to their schools about having a garden at the schools. Do a farm to table, farm to kitchen program. And that's again one of the things I loved about the Waldorf school is we had a huge garden, and they still have it, and it would supply the kitchen, and the parents would donate their time to making meals for the children. They always had fresh soups and they always had fresh salads and it was great because the kids, also the students would each year, depending upon what grade they were in, would work in the garden. So they learned how to garden from a very young age. And uh, think about the nutritional value of what the children then are eating in their school lunches versus what they're being. And I know that we could spend an hour just talking about that, but I'm hoping that this inspires people to maybe create a
Yes.
community garden if they don't have one, if it'll help inspire people to reach out to their neighbors and get some, chickens and do it together because, having chickens, I mean, it's not a lot of work, but it's a commitment of time because you have
Yep.
to be there every day. You have to feed them, you have to clean their coop. But imagine if you shared that responsibility with a neighbor or two, you'd have fresh eggs. And now eggs, of course, are at a premium. So, one last question is um, I assume that you have stories of people coming back to you about how they healed themselves by eating your meat. That I
Yes.
would think that people with chronic health, that the focus of this podcast is really about chronic health and how we can heal. So could you just share one or two stories of people that have, you know, come to you and shared their healing?
Yeah, so I'll share two. One was a dramatic one. We were sitting down at supper one evening and knock on the door. So I went up to see who was at the door, and there was a man there. He was holding his wife in his arms. He said, "My wife is down to 90 pounds. The doctors say if she doesn't get toxin-free meat, she'll die. Can you help me?" And so they began getting stuff from us. And boy, she got healthy, robust, and ended up outliving her husband
Wow.
over time. And so, that was that. That's completely anecdotal. I get it. That's not a double blind study, but it was a dramatic turnaround. We had another one, a lady who was young, and she was a vegan, and she was just determined that this vegan, well, her ligaments started to fall apart, and to where I mean, she was not even 30 years old, and she could hardly get out of bed. I mean, she was in rough shape, and she came to us and began eating our now here she was a vegan, so I can't say it was ours as opposed to if she gotten it out of the store. All right, but anyway, the point is she began eating our stuff, and she was in her late 20s. She'd also stopped ovulating, and they wanted children. She and her husband wanted children, and she couldn't ovulate. And so, make a long story short, within a year, she was up jumping around. She completely, um, she drank all the health Kool-Aid. I mean, became a member of Weston A. Price Foundation and began making bone broths and all this stuff. She had a baby happily, successfully, and is now just a powerhouse and teaches classes on on healing yourself with good food. And so yeah, we've had people with autism. We've had people who have, especially with poultry, they're allergic to things like chlorine. And these supermarket chickens are dredged in. They're just bathed in chlorine for antimicrobial, and we don't use any of that here. And we've had people, for example, that they touch a store-bought chicken and suddenly within 5 minutes they have a rash up their arm due to the chlorine, and of course ours, no problem. So yeah, it's really exciting. I'll finish with this one. We had a lady come in, and this little 6-year-old boy, very very small, very small, and she said he's such a picky eater. He just won't eat anything, and very actually pretty concerned about him. And so I love that you like the nutritional of eggs. We have wonderful eggs here, and so she got a couple dozen. She called me a week later. She said, I can't feel. She said he's eating 6 eggs a day
Wow.
voraciously. I can't fill him up. And and so his body was his body was starving for nutrition, for good food. And when that good food went through his mouth gateway, we're back to the top of the program now. When that gateway went in, think of the I'm kind of theatrical and dramatic, so I'm thinking his microbiome. I mean, they threw a party, man. I mean, wow, we got nutrition, yeah, and I'm sure they were dancing inside when he got that. So yeah, those are just some stories, but it's real. Yes, it really it is, and we need to put attention on that. I mean, who look, you can be very concerned and even worried about a lot of things going on in our culture today. Economically and defund the police and you know uh, all sorts of stuff that's going on and but there's one thing that you don't want to be if things fall apart. There's one thing you don't want to be when the wheels fall off, and that's sick. You don't want to be the one in the back room that says, hey, while y'all are running out the front, can you pick up my bed and take me with you?
Right.
No, you don't want to be that. And I think that some of that is part of the Maha movement now, is stimulating that, because there are a lot of disconcerting things, from global wars to all sorts of things, and there's a temerity, a bit of a concern in people's heads about where we are. We're at a tipping point politically and globally and all sorts of things. And so this idea of, can I take care of myself? Can I stay healthy? Is, I think, is on people's minds, and certainly food is not everything, but it certainly is a critical element in that approach, so that we then individually can be hope and help when everything else becomes hopeless and helpless.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate again how important it is. Yes, you're going to pay more money for food from a regenerative farm, but what is that worth as far as your health? What is your health worth? And I remember years and years ago, there was this whole thing about you can eat organic today and pay a little more, or you can pay for your sickness later. And, investing yourself, find a local farmer, order from Polyface Farms, seek out regenerative farmers and get to know them and find out, are they vaccinating? Because again, do you want to just eat chemicals in your body, or do you want to eat something that's pure and unadulterated? So, um, anyway, I just want to thank you so much because I know you are an incredibly busy person, and
Oh,
I really value and appreciate you, and I just can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom with us.
well, you're welcome, Dr. Nancy. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.